Down in Bottle Alley lived Timothy McNally, a decent politician and a gentleman at that. Beloved by all the ladies, the gossoons and the babies that occupy the building called McNally's Row of Flats. And it's Ireland and Italy, Jerusalem and Germany, Chinese and Africans and a paradise for rats, all jumbled up together in the snow and rainy weather. They constitute the tenants in McNally's Row of Flats. That great conglomeration of men from every nation, the Tower of Babylonium, it couldn't equal that. A peculiar institution were the brogues without dilution. They rattled on together in McNally's Row of Flats. And it's Ireland and Italy, Jerusalem and Germany, Chinese and Africans and a paradise for rats, all jumbled up together in the snow and rainy weather. They constitute the tenants in McNally's Row of Flats. Bags of rags and papers, tramps and other slavers, Italian lazzaronis and lots of hungry cats, lying on the benches and dying there by inches from the open ventilation in McNally's Row of Flats. And it's Ireland and Italy, Jerusalem and Germany, Chinese and Africans and a paradise for rats, all jumbled up together in the snow and rainy weather. They constitute the tenants in McNally's Row of Flats. It never was expected that the rent would be collected. They levied on the furniture, the bedding and the slats. And it's then you'd see the rally as they battled down the alley, evicted from the building called McNally's Row of Flats. And it's Ireland and Italy, Jerusalem and Germany, Chinese and Africans and a paradise for rats, all jumbled up together in the snow and rainy weather. They constitute the tenants in McNally's Row of Flats.
Salvete vos, salvete vos. I am John Coleman from ApocatastasisInstitute for the Humanities and Alternative College and High School here on New Milford, Connecticut, USA. The purpose of this broadcast is to talk about excellence. It's entitled Hormel Education Begone. The opening song was from Mick Maloney, and it is McNally's Row of Flats. And this broadcast is kind of jagging off of our newsletter theme this week. And so as we pull up the screen share, I suppose that will be our advertisement. We do have a weekly newsletter. It's like the Islamic calendar, though. It seems to fall back one day every week, so it comes out about every 8 days. Originally, the goal was to get it out every Friday, and then every Friday slipped into every Saturday. Now I'm good to get it out by Sunday afternoon. So all right, so we do have a newsletter. Of course, there is something of the infinite regression here, because a lot of you who are watching this were alerted to this from the newsletter. So I don't know if it serves me best to mention it, but anyway, on pretty much every one of our pages, you will have the opportunity to subscribe. There's a little box here. I've already subscribed, uh, apparently. So what you would see if you have not subscribed is a place to type in your email, and then once you subscribe, you get this button here. So that's available aplenty on the site, and I kind of had this ongoing dialogue on different points, including today. Excellence. That's what we're here for. And with that being said, let's pull this up here. And just a few words here. This will not be a big presentation with schema and talking points and so forth. But I think the point is good nonetheless, that we need to orient ourselves for excellence. So I need, first of all, to explain what Hormel is. So in America, we have a company called Hormel. Now, if you don't understand this, America is basically a giant wealth extraction machine. It has always been a giant parasitic wealth extraction machine. And as a result of that, two things obtain. One of which is that you can have giant commercial conglomerates, which are effectively monopolies. And then second to that is you can just sell the population the most unfit food and chemicals that you can imagine. And while you're at it, you can just manipulate things like colors. If you don't know, as an old fast food worker myself, the colors of red and yellow, like you see on Spam here, Hormel pepperoni, turkey pepperoni for you kosher folks, this Herndez salsa, whatever the case may be, dill pickle flavored pepperoni, whatever the case may be, orange and how do you say, yellow and red are colors that allegedly the marketers have found make people very hungry, which is why you'll see them often used for fast food. But anyway, Hormel is very much like the Kraft Corporation. It's not quite a monopoly. That might be too strong words, but certainly approaching that. In America, too, you have to have the illusion of choice. So you'll often have these competing brands like Coors and Budweiser, or Hormel and Kraft, or McDonald's and Burger King. And they're basically offering the same product, but you get the illusion of choice. Crest and Colgate and so forth. Okay, but anyhow, Hormel Begone. Hormel Begone. So what the hell does this have to do with education? Well, a parable or a simile came to me the other day, and that was, or perhaps an illustration, the idea that a man who is starving, or a man who is eating out of the garbage, Hormel food, nice dill pickle flavored pepperonis or ground turkey. Who am I kidding? Some of this stuff looks pretty good. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I haven't eaten Hormel chili. Oh boy, that was actually one of my. I'll be honest with you. That was one of the high points of this summer. I had a can of Hormel Hormel chili and the fixings at the end of the pilgrimage on day one of the pilgrimage, and that thing was cold, and it was not prepared as the Hormel people wanted it prepared. But I tell you, after 20 miles, yes, the pilgrimage 25 for 2 days, but the first day was 20 miles. After 20 miles of walking on blisters, I can tell you that cold Hormel can of chili was very good. Anyway, I'll spare you the memory lane. But the point is, Hormel is not good food, right? If you are starving, then yes, corn nuts and Planters and Black Label, Black Label bacon are good things, right? If you are a starving man, if you've been eating cereal with cold water for breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 20 years, you've been eating the proverbial water and bread in the prisons. Yes, Hormel will appear to you to be manna from heaven. I would agree. However, Skippy, look at that. They pretty much own everything. So this is exactly what happens in America. So you have a giant overweening corporation. And one of the things they own is Skippy, and then you have Kraft, and they're going to own, what do you call it, Jiffy or whatever, Jif. And they're the exact same product, probably made in the exact same factories, and they're going to pretend they're competing with each other. This sort of thing wouldn't happen with politics, right? Wouldn't happen with religions, right? Anyway. However, whilst it is true that the starving bum on the street will find a Planter's peanuts delicious after eating crow for his breakfast, lunch, and dinner, the same cannot be said with those who have developed palates. So if you are eating fancy foods, my God Almighty, what's going to come up here? Okay, these are sufficiently fancy. You can never tell. Google, actually, I have my words with the Google Corporation, but I will say that you tend not to get pornographic images when you type in cold searches. You have no idea what might come up on Yandex or Bing. They're less censored, but that has a downside as well. Okay. Anyway, these are sufficiently fancy. You can't afford these things, and I certainly can't afford these things. And I don't know if I'd go in for the snails there, but pretty much everything else looks pretty yummy. However, if you're eating this, right, if something along the lines of this is what you're scarfing back, Hormel is horrible. McDonald's is horrible, right? If you're used to eating this swirly thing, looks fancy and expensive, or this giant sea spider called a lobster, which people seem to like, or these bugs, these ocean bugs called shrimp, which are very delicious when they're fried, bug or not. Right? If you're used to eating this sort of thing, something like Hormel or McDonald's or whatever gas station slop we've all come across, gas station hot dogs that have been there for 12 hours, right? That's unbelievable, right? You're eating this nice California roll sushi platter, this chicken thing. Look at this beautiful kind of tartare steak. That doesn't turn me off. I kind of like tartare. Maybe not tartare, but rare. Yeah, I could go in for that. What did Fred Flintstone say on that 1990s live action adaptation with John Goodman and Liz Taylor, Lord have mercy on her, playing Fred Flintstone? The John Goodman impersonation said, my father ate raw meat every day of his life, and he lived to the ripe old age of 35. So I don't know if the rare steak is good, but it's good in a different way. It's good on the palate. Maybe it's not good for the health. Who knows? Okay, you get the point. If you're eating well, Hormel is a nightmare. McDonald's is a nightmare. Burger King's a nightmare. The gas station hot dog is a nightmare. However, if you're starving, then Hormel is your man. And now we transition to the point of this presentation, and that is education. Hormel education Begone. We have come to be satisfied with the husks, to quote St. Luke's Gospel, the parable of the prodigal son. We have come to be satisfied with the mediocre. And the reason is because we are under we here in these United States and in different ways across the world are under a warfare. I'm going to be talking a lot about this once I get my essay on piety finished. There's a long way to go and a short time to get there. But we are under bombardment. Part of that is indeed gustatory bombardment in the likes of Hormel and these food companies, which are allowed to put God knows what preservatives and additives into their so-called food. But it's in other ways. It's with the chemtrails. It's with the wireless, all sorts of wireless waves and so forth. The insects and the birds and things feel this more than we do. That's why you haven't seen fireflies or bees around so much, though they made a little bit of a comeback, I noticed this year. But there are many other ways. I believe that large swaths of this world are given over to literally open air experiments. Syria is an experiment. The whole ISIS garbage was an experiment. The European Union and the welfare state, that's an open experiment. What's happening in China, that's one system, and so forth and so forth. In America, the experiment is to see how stressed out you can make people, particularly regarding money. That's the experiment here. We are under a bombardment, and I can go on quite extensively to make this point. I trust those of you who know what's going on, and don't need it repeated. Those who don't know what's going on, it's too late. Just enjoy your servitude. But for those of you who see what's happening, it's sufficient to say that we are under a bombardment. We are the starving bums. And so what is presented to us as education, we accept, just like I accepted that can of Hormel chili after 20 miles of blisters and sweat and very, very heavy backpack during our pilgrimage, right? That was manna from heaven. That was a most welcome and delightful consummation, literally, to consume there. And that is what we've come to accept for education. And when I say that, when I say so-called education, I am not just picking on the mainstream schools. Now, the problem, we'll get to the so-called alternatives in a second here, but the problem with the mainstream schools, and this is not just the public schools. I'm talking about the religious private schools, the secular private schools. I'm talking about the colleges, the junior highs, the elementary schools, the preschools, the daycares. What are the problems of the mainstream education? Let's remind ourselves. They are two. The first is their secularism. It is a mighty disservice to children and children who are a bit older to tell them about the world, but to not tell them why any of it exists, which is secularism in a nutshell. What a nonsensical thing to do, to give 12 and 16 and 18 years of education through the graduate school. What a nonsensical thing to do, to fill a man's mind with knowledge about the things of this world, but to not give it any meaning. This is a tremendous delict of modern so-called education. The second point would be its utilitarianism. Now, in this, the so-called mainstream needs to be given a bit of grace, as the dear Protestants say, especially in the South, right? Someone's messing up, you say, oh, we'll give them grace. That's a beautiful expression. I will give grace, as they say, to the mainstream, because, especially the public schools, because they have enough honesty to say their error out loud. They are public. The purpose of the public schools, that's a lot of P's, is to produce public men. So it is objectively a delict of the mainstream that it has sold, so to speak, It has sold education to the population. Why should you send your children to the schools? Well, we will make public men. Now, I indeed have to show grace and let them off the hook tremendously. This is a philosophical error of a great degree, but at least they're putting it on their marquees, right? A public person, anything legally speaking that is public is commercial. So the purpose of the public schools, to their credit, and they tell you on their signs, is to make public, commercially successful slaves. That's their purpose. I'm not going to be quite so generous towards the private schools, which have the same telos, but it is the utilitarian. That is the second delict. The first delict of the mainstream is its secularism. The second delict is the utilitarianism. Now, there's plenty of critique to go around, because when we speak of Hormel education, we must also include those communities who propose themselves as being alternatives, by which we mean the homeschoolers, head and shoulders above the rest, in their shame and their betrayals. Not just personally, I'm saying professionally and philosophically. The unschoolers, the road schoolers, whatever the hell it is that I'm doing in so-called alternative education in the college level. There's very few of my sort around. The autodidacts, whatever the case may be. We too have delicts that make our offerings Hormel level. And what are they? Well, on the so-called alternative, I see two as well. So the problem with the mainstream, in a nutshell, once again, is the secularism and the utilitarianism of it. These are errors of tremendous magnitude. Well, what about the alternatives? Well, the problems with the alternatives are a fundamental anti-authoritarianism. We set out 12 years ago with Apocatastasis. We are erected by the dead generations past. And over the years, people have come and gone. And this work has been for excellence. And even all those years in Ridgefield, at that sorry so-called traditional, so-called Catholic school off of Lake Memonasco, all those years that I was there personally, and since the Republic established Apocatastasis, for excellence. Excellence. It was a tremendous letdown to come to this conclusion in the mainstream, of which I have extensive experience, both as a student primarily, and then in different capacities as a teacher in public school, in public colleges, and so forth. And then also in the so-called alternative world, what a letdown that excellence is not the North Star. That's the problem. That's the Hormel education. Yes, the problem with the alternatives, to conclude my thoughts on that front, it is fundamentally anti-authoritarian. And that's why I've never quite fit in with the so-called alternative education. They hate authority. They're acting like sophomores. It took me a long time to come to this conclusion. Why did I not fit in? Why am I seeing very similar flippancy towards knowledge? I was horrified in the mainstream to see such sloppiness. I don't know what to say. Let's go back to Hormel. You want to see your reds and your yellows so you get hungry, right? No one can say what happens in the mainstream schools, of which I also include the private schools and your religious bunches and whatever. No one can say that's serious education. And that has to do with the philosophical problems of secularism and utilitarianism. It's a betrayal. It's a beard. It's a look at that Chinese spam. You see my cursor? Look at that. The Chinamen took a break from the dogs, and they had the fake. Well, I don't even know what spam's made out of, but so anyway, I was horrified by the mainstream my entire life. I knew this was a mockery. You tried to make it work. After all, for a certain stretch of that's all you know. That's all that is the field. There are no alternatives. Then you find out about homeschoolers, et cetera, unschoolers, and then you say, "Aha! Look here's what I've been waiting for." But then you find out they're just as flippant and cavalier about knowledge too, because they fundamentally are anti-authoritarian. They are also just as materialistic or utilitarian as the mainstream, but also the other dialect of the so-called alternative modalities is that they are anti-intellectual. Now, I'm going to give a talk in about a week and a half on so-called Reformation Day about some of the, I'll say, peculiar aspects of American religion, which affects all American culture, regardless of one's private confession. But part of that is going to be the anti-intellectualism that is copper fastened in American life. And bizarrely, the so-called alternative education is anti-intellectual. It hates scholars. It hates scholarship. It is suspicious. It has, as St. Paul says, evil suspicion. That is the vice. If secularism is the spiritual vice of the mainstream, even the so-called religious schools are fundamentally calibrated to secularism because they are fundamentally calibrated to economic success. That is what the parents who go there and send their children there, moreover, want. When you go to Immaculate High School, that Roman Catholic high school in Danbury, yeah, I mean, you want your kid to go to Mass on Sunday, but you really want them to be a successful capitalist wage slave. That's why you're going there. And many schools, many of these so-called private schools are quite stark in their consciousness and their advertising about this point. And we're not even going to talk about the charter schools. Okay, but on the other end, the predominant fault in the alternative is anti-intellectualism. And is it I don't know, because I would say it probably breaks even with the anti-authoritarianism. And there you go. How there too is a non-ironic observation of a very deep problem. So the first so-called irony, not really, is that alternative education, of which homeschool is the shamefaced leader, is anti-intellectualism. They do not trust scholars. And I could give you a conga line of examples of the anti-intellectualism of that community. But at the same time, and this is not ironic either, they are also anti life of the mind. So the point is, getting back to our fundamental conclusion, that education in these United States, whether it's for the mainstream or the so-called alternative, is Hormel slop. The reason one or the other of these modalities appeals to us, the only possible reason, is that we are like the hobo. We have been warred upon by the pretended ruling class of this land. So we have come to think objectively that Hormel chili with beans is good because we are living off of crumbs of meaning, crumbs of telos, crumbs of logos, if you like. We have been given slop philosophically and meaningfully in this society. And so we accept public school, we accept private school, we accept colleges, mainstream. We think the homeschool is great. We think the unschool is great. Give me that road school. All of this is garbage. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of education. So what is education? Of which we'll have old books to guide us. What will take us beyond Hormel level education of whatever flattering adjective? What will bring us into excellence? Because only excellence is going to survive the social changes which are upon us. You mark my words. Most schools, including most of these homeschool co-ops and pods and whatever, they are going away faster than you can imagine. I don't mean tomorrow, next month, next decade. I'm not saying that. But when this education nonsense that we call so-called education, when this field comes down, it's going to come down hard and fast. You mark my words. I said that years ago. When COVID come on, I started saying that. And I've become more confirmed in that as I observe all of the data points coming in. When this thing comes down, even its pretended alternative, it is going to come down so fast, your head will spin. There will be very few formal schools left, and I'm going to tell you this. It's not very comforting for me. There are going to be very few people that will entertain formal education. Right now, the mass of the bourgeoisie is still plugged into it, largely because the mass of the bourgeoisie does that. The bourgeois man, not to get off on a tangent, because I could talk quite extensively on this point, but in a nutshell, the bourgeois does not move unless other bourgeois are moving. The sociologists predict that the 15% mark is what you need to get the bourgeois to start changing their beliefs. Meaning, for instance, when I was a boy, everyone seemingly went to church on Sunday, or whatever sect you want. Okay, that's a whole other discussion. But the point is, your ass was in a pew. And at a certain point, more than 15% of people stopped going to church. And then pretty much within 20 years or so, all of the bourgeois stopped going to church. The bourgeois is a herd man. The word burg, berry in different European languages. This means city. So bourgeoisie is the city man. The city man is a herd man. He cannot operate, literally, he cannot operate outside of the city. And so he will not make decisions that will rock the boat. He might be offending a potential customer after all. The point is, when it comes to education, the bourgeois right now, the only reason he is sending his child to the homeschool co-op, to the public school, to the college down the road, to the private school, the only reason the bourgeois is doing this is because other bourgeois are doing it. None of them believe it. I can tell you this with 20 years under my belt. I'm teaching 20 years this year. Some of you have been retired longer than I've been teaching, so I'm not swinging dick here. But for most of you, you have not been teaching for 20 years, and you certainly haven't run into the so-called alternative and had the experiences I've had. So I have a certain authority here, limited as it is, but I'm telling you, whether it's public, private, home, tertiary, secondary, primary, the people who are sending their children here do not care about education. They care about the errors that I laid out. I laid out 4 errors, 2 and 2. 2 of the errors in the mainstream, it's secularism and it's utilitarianism. 2 of the errors in the pretended alternative, it's anti-authoritarianism and it's anti-intellectualism. And we might as well tack on also it's fundamental materialism or it's utilitarianism, as you like. Those are the motives. Those are lies. Those are lies. And as long as lies obtain, they will fall. Lies always fall. And we have an entire segment of American life and life of the world. I think it's especially bad in America because of certain dynamics which have been dealt with on this channel and elsewhere ad nauseum. All lies will collapse, period. So all that will survive what's going to come. That's a huge book. Look at this. This is a huge book right here. All schools, all lies will fall. But whatever schools survive will be the schools that do not coddle lies. And they will be schools of excellence. That is all that will survive this. We teachers and we students and we parents of real students, we are going to shrink very much very soon. We're going to become like carters, smiths, wagon makers, old photography guys. You know, when I was a boy, there was a guy, he was Tom. He was always in the bar down the street. Tom was tall and lanky. Tom was living at that time in the age of the wind-up camera. Some of you don't know about the wind-up disposable camera. So for all of you kids, before there was iPads, there was this thing. You could buy these rather inexpensively for the prom, for the sock hop, for a time at the amusement park. This was the Twitter. How do you say the Instagram? This was the Instagram of its day. This is the analog Instagram. You would buy these in drugstores and in box stores and whatever, and it would take a picture. And where was I going with this? Yeah, so in the 1990s, we had all of this stuff. And anyway, I mean, if you were getting a picture, you had to have it developed, whatever the case may be. These are just very, very much of a time, these disposable fellas. Anyway, Tom, we're all going to become Tom. Tom was a lanky dude at the bar with my father and all the other men around here. And he was really into old-fashioned photography. I don't think he had 2 cents to rub together, but he had the old cameras, and he had the dark room, and he had the skills to do this, and he knew all of the intricacies of quote unquote real photography. We can say the same simile with records. People get very much into these artisanal things, wines and beer making and so forth. That's what formal education is going to become. To a large extent, it's going to retreat back into the upper classes. Mass education is over. And there's a very, very good article. Let's see if it comes up here. Post Literate Society. I would very much recommend this article, The Dawn of the Post-Literate Society. So why is the bourgeoisie about to vacate mass education? Well, they don't believe it. It's based on philosophical errors that we've laid out. But also, the bourgeoisie is no longer reading. And this is a great article you see here from Substack. And one of the things that happens when you stop reading is you retreat into magic, as this author brings up at least 2 times, if not 3. You retreat into magic and unrational, I kind of smushed those words together, unrational thinking. So why on earth would you care about formal, logical, consecutive learning when you are not reading and you don't appreciate these things? So we are absolutely regressing. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that the bourgeoisie has not been reading books in a serious way, en masse, for 20 years. They certainly haven't been handwriting for about 30 years. So what the hell do they care about sending their children to formal education? They're doing it now because other bourgeois are still doing it. When 15% or more start homeschooling or just, let the kid go feral, which they're pretty close to, more or less, when you hit that tipping point, you're going to see the bourgeois exit this thing called formal education, lickety-split. Now, none of this is good. It invites its own proper treatment, but it is what will be happening. So those of us who continue with formal education and know the value of the life of the mind are going to be very, very few. But we must, if we are to keep our vocation, if we're to keep any vocation, we must be copper fastened, once again, to excellence. That is the only thing which will keep us from sliding into Hormel education, is excellence, excellence, excellence verbed. Formal education, including the alternatives, have entered into a dead end. It's funny, Malcolm X wrote that book, his autobiography, I believe in 1963 or 64. He was murdered, I think, in the preparation of the galleys. And he said that in his day, Western civilization had entered a cul-de-sac. And that's true for the education of Western civilization, has been true largely for the last 100 years, including the alternatives. All of this is going to come down very fast. Whoever keeps their vocation must keep it for excellence. That is all that will tide us through. What does that mean? Earlier in this presentation, I mentioned that I teased that out. Education. What is the educated soul? What is the soul that is not satisfied with Hormel education? Education, we use this word, we throw it around, we think of it as a process, as Ivan Ilyich says. Education is a quality of the soul that is developed. You can develop your taste, speaking of Hormel and fancy foods and crumbs from tables. You can develop your sense of taste. There was a great article years ago by a woman called Maria Horvath, who seems to be a very, unexciting woman. She runs a website called Tradition in Action. When I was mucking around the traditional Catholic world, we came across that site. It has many sensible things on that site. Maria Horvath, the author and the owner of that site, seems like a big killjoy, but she did have an article once about eating habits in France for children compared to these United States. And she had pointed out that in the grade schools, the children of France are served by actual chefs, whereas in America, you're served by, fast food level workers, which is to say, and this is not knocking people in that line of work. I've done it myself. I worked at Arby's for several years before they fired me. I worked at bars and spent a lot of my life, and probably spent 12 years of my life working in fast food and restaurants and things. But in America, anyway, the level of skill, let's put it that way, the level of skill that children get from their lunch servers is the level of a fast food worker. You're defrosting things, you're frying things. It does not take any sort of skill whatsoever. And there are huge psychologies behind this, Mrs. Horvath noticed. But the point is, if you raise a child like they do in France with excellent food and with, for our purposes in this recording, excellent education, they will learn to love it. I've seen this with little children. Whatever I say about the petty homeschoolers, I have met some impressive ones, believe it or not. And I consider one example, and this was a family that just was in the habit of listening to classical music. I've tried to get in that habit. I've never quite been able to take to it, but I can appreciate it when people can. And this family, who had raised their daughters, they were all little girls, with classical music, and then, maybe on the weekends with folk music and, the old-fashioned stuff. I used to drive these girls around when they were girls. Now they're much older. A few times on the radio that we would play the song channels and the song stations, just for whatever reason. The girls were horrified because they had grown up with excellent music in their ears. And actual pop music, which is folk music. And then when they heard whatever was blaring out the radio, I mean, it was just noise to them, because they had a palate and auditory palate that was trained. And getting back to education, that's what the educated soul is. Education is not the accumulation of lots of facts and data. A computer can do that. That's why everyone's running off to this AI nonsense. Speaking of slop. But the educated soul, and those who will keep the educational flame alive in the changes that are coming, those are the souls that will appreciate the hunger for knowledge, excellence, and excellence means discipline, which is why the alternatives, and homeschool in particular, is dead as well. It's done for, it's doomed, put a fork in it, don't even waste your time with it. It's dead because it's anti-authoritarian, and it's frankly a very feminine enterprise as well. It's literally almost all women running these homeschool things, and therefore it's going to be undisciplined. How on earth can you have excellence without discipline? So the educated mind is the disciplined mind. The schools that exist going forward will be the disciplined schools. They will be the schools that respect authority. They're not just pissing on authorities like the so-called alternative does, or dishonoring them just in their lethargy like the mainstream does. And finally, and this is my last point, finally, the educated soul and the souls of the teachers and the students going forward in the few schools that will remain this coming collapse, they will be humble. They will be people who can acknowledge where they don't know things and that they are grateful for knowledge. Those are the qualities of the educated soul: hunger, humility, wonder, humbling down. We could chop it up different ways. But all of this leans towards excellence. And that is the only way we can say with sincerity, Hormel education, begone. All right, so I'm going to knock off with all this food talk. I'm going to knock off for my lunch here. And while you're hanging on my every word, head over to Apocatastasis's channel, our website here, I should say. We have all sorts of channels. You can see those, by the way, at the end of our site. Where are we here? There we go. So, yeah, we do have all sorts of channels here, but check out our main page. I think that'll keep you busy for a long stretch. And hope to see you in the world that's coming educationally, because it's only a world for excellence. With that being said, thank you so much and have a great day.